Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Alliance for Reentry. Welcome to our fourth segment of our panel series, Women Leading Through Fear to Freedom. And as you can see, FEAR is an acronym, and it's not the traditional definition of fear, false evidence appearing real. We've decided to change our acronym, and we have decided to call it For Real Evidence, Absolutely Real, because the evidence of things that women go through coming back into society and re-entering our society, it's absolutely real. And so with that being said, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the McCormick Foundation, and also the Finnegan Family Foundation. And tonight I'd like to introduce our moderator. No, first let me introduce the Alliance. Let me back up a little bit. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So you might want to know what the Alliance is. Well, first of all, the Alliance for Reentry is a statewide movement comprised of directly impacted individuals, service providers, advocates, educational institutions, and the faith community. You might ask, what does the Alliance do? Well, we build relationships, and we believe that by coming together statewide, we can build real power to create change. We also develop leaders. We believe that people with records should play a central role in the issues that affect us. And also the Alliance takes action. The goal of the Alliance is to build powerful campaigns and become a powerful voice for systemic change and justice. Why, you may ask, a panel on women and incarceration? Well, first of all, men are usually the central focus of incarceration. You know, when the criminal justice system was created, it was not created with women in mind. And so we would like to highlight women that are in leadership. And also we would like Did y'all hear that last part?
I did.
What part did I stop at?
I believe the last thing I heard was about women.
Okay, so you may ask, why a panel on women and incarceration? The reason we want a panel on women and incarceration is because men are normally the central focus of incarceration. You know, when the criminal justice system was created, you know, it wasn't created with women in mind. And so we would also like to highlight women that are in leadership. Also, the women's incarceration rate continues to rise faster than men. And last, we would like to educate people on the complexities of reentry for women. You know, women are different individuals, and there is no cookie cutter approach, and there is no one size fits all. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight. Our moderator is Dr. Zaria Davis, a mentor, an educator, an advocate, and she is a senior associate with Pretrial Justice Institute, focusing on advocacy and community engagement. She owns New Direction Coaching and Consulting, LLC, providing leadership coaching and reentry consultation to nonprofits. Zaria is passionate about working with women in reentry and launched Filling the Gap Reentry Services in 2019, addressing many of the voids of services in her community for formerly incarcerated women. Zaria holds a doctorate in social work from Capella University, a master's in social work from University of Cincinnati, and a bachelor's in administration and sociology from Wilberforce University. She is a Just Leadership USA Leading with Conviction 2019 graduate, a Community Leaders Institute 2019 graduate, and an Excel 14 cohort member 2019 to 2020. She is actively engaged in her local community in developing and training new advocates, especially those impacted by the criminal justice system. Zaria is the proud mother of a freshman engineering student. Welcome.
Thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. Just the topic alone, right? So the type of work that I do with Filling the Gap is to address those barriers for women. So I just find it so fitting to be here with our awesome panel today. And I'm really excited to just get into our reading out the bios of our panelists and getting that conversation going. So I'm going to start with our first panelist. We have Mrs. Deborah Anthony, who is the director and founder of Compassionate Outreach to the Metro East Incorporated, and is located in Belleville, Illinois, East St. Louis, Illinois area. Compassionate Outreach the mission is the empowerment, transformation, and restoration of lives and communities. A visionary who believes helping others achieve their highest quality of life requires a holistic approach. She serves as an associate pastor at the O'Fallon Apostolic Assembly Church, where the concept of prison ministry and angel tree was originated. She's married to Raymond Anthony, co-founder of Compassionate Outreach. They have 5 adult children and 18 grandchildren. How awesome. She has and still is living through the effects of generational harm as a result of incarceration and injustices. She has a Bachelor's of Arts in Business Administration and a Master's in Management and Human Resources from Webster University in St. Louis, Missouri. So welcome, welcome. And our next panelist is future Dr. Erica Banks. You see how I claim that? She is currently a PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology at Northwestern University. Her dissertation focuses on how formerly incarcerated Black women in Chicago and New York City navigate society after returning home from prison. Through in-depth interviews, Erica looks at how formerly incarcerated Black women secure gainful employment, obtain stable housing, navigate the legal system, and rebuilds relationships with children, friends, family, and manages the stigma and stereotype. Moreover, Erica is especially interested in understanding how incarceration affects Black women's income and opportunity to advance in their occupations. Prior to her being a PhD student in sociology at Northwestern, she earned her master's degree in humanities and social thought at New York University, her bachelor's degree in sociology at the University of Texas in Austin, and associate's degree in general studies at, is it Navarro College? So welcome, welcome. And then our last panelist, last but not least, we have Teleza Rodgers, who is a community advocate and is engaged with Live Free. She is a member of Way of Life International Church in Chicago and serves on its social action ministry. She's active with the, I'm about to say it wrong anyway, with the TRAM, which is a trauma group that she'll explain a little bit more, community organization in North Lawndale, and serves on the West Side Community Benefits Coalition Issues team. She's an advocate for mental health and domestic violence, and she is also blessed to be the parent of 4 very unique sons. So we want to welcome our panelists, and we want to just start this discussion with saying that oftentimes when we have these conversations, people may be triggered. And so we are going to drop in the chat a resource if you do need some supports. It is for NAMI Chicago's helpline, and that number is 833-626-4244, and that is a direct resource for people. So starting with our first panelist that I introduced, Deborah, I'd just like for you to just share a little bit about your current work and how it relates to our topic this evening.
Sure, but before I do, I believe that we wanted to take a moment of silence that had been addressed for, I'm butchering the name, Kenosha.
Yes, so we can definitely do that. So if we want to just take a minute and lift up just everything that's going on in Kenosha, Wisconsin right now, with the shooting and with the unrest. There are several of us probably on this call who are engaged in some other organizations, and such as All of Us or None, and we've just learned some really disturbing additional news about what's going on up there. So if we just want to take a moment to just reflect and send positive energy to our brothers and sisters there. Thank you. Thank you all for just taking that time to acknowledge just what we are currently going through on a, it seems like, daily basis right now in our country. And we want to just keep people lifted up and continue to keep them in our thoughts, and just continuing to just pour love and support into those who are out there in the streets, really protesting and for the loss of life as a result as well. So we will go ahead and get started. And thank you again, Deborah, for bringing that to our attention. I think that is so crucial to acknowledge that. And so we want to give you an opportunity to just share a little bit about yourself, the work that you're doing, and then again, how it's relevant to our conversation this evening.
Okay, so thank you again, Dr. Davis. So I started this with the idea in mind as a licensed minister that I was just going to go in, save the world. I was going to go to that group and I was going to tell them about Jesus because, hey, they would be prime candidate, right? Well, I just want you to know they did more saving me than I did ever saving them. And from that developed Angel Tree, which is a program that's based around children whose parents are incarcerated. And we still do that program to today. And this is back in 2008. And so we're going along and we're kind of pretty happy right now. We're going in and we're ministering the gospel and we're working with the children. And as I worked with those, and it's interesting because I'm both state and federal. So the prison that I was going in is federal, and the ladies started getting out and they started asking me questions. And it dawned on me that I did not have a program for reentry. And then I looked around in my church and realized that I had a, what was she? Federal parole officer, literally, that was a member. And she started taking me to the reentries. And I just got excited and I just felt led of the Lord from there. And I went back to the board and they're like, you're crazy. You're gonna add more. And I said, yes, I am. Feel led of the Lord to do that. And I think my first reentry was in Texas, believe it or not, during, I think, the Bush years. And from there, I didn't know anything about what reentry really was going to look like. So I just gathered up all the information I could and began to work from there. So we totally are grassroots. We're from the ground up without really a whole lot of financial support. We've been doing it for over 10 years, actually pretty much all volunteer. And from there, we now have 4 programs. Connect for Life. We have our Beyond the Wall, which is where we go into the prison, our Angel Tree, and then REACH. And REACH stands for Reentry, Aftercare, Transportation, and Housing. So from there, my husband and I felt led of the Lord to purchase some property. And we've been working with, we work both men and women, by the way. We actually started with men. And about 2.5 to 3 years now, it just seemed like I ran into some people who wanted to partner with me in certain ways and volunteer. And we started talking about Logan and different facilities. And I said, okay, I'll go to one of the reentry summits for women. And now I'm doing women. So I'm excited. I have a house in Granite City for the men and a place in Belleville, Illinois for the women.
That is wonderful. I'm gonna have to talk to you after this. Erica, I'd like to hear from you. Just share a little bit about your work. It sounds like your research is gonna, like when it's all said and done, it's gonna be awesome. I'm looking forward to reading it. Share just about what you're doing and just how you got involved in this.
Great, thanks. So I'll give you the short version of how I got involved in this. Essentially, I've always been interested in inequality in race and gender. And during my master's program, I took an interest in mass incarceration. I had always wanted to learn more about it. And this was also during the time where there were the Michael Brown protests that was going on. And so that kind of, fueled more of my interest in it. And I was also considering law school at the time. So essentially, I started reading about just general research on mass incarceration and the history of, Black people's relationship to the carceral state. And I kept wondering, there was this nagging question, like, where are women? Why are we not talking about women? Where are they in this picture? And so I started, looking up articles and books about women in incarceration. And I found out, as we've talked about before, the incarceration rate for women has been increasing for the past 40 years. And there still isn't enough conversation, enough resources directed towards women. And so that pretty much solidified my interest in this work. And so when I started applying for PhD programs, I was pretty committed to this topic. And then I specifically wanted to focus on Black women just because they've been disproportionately affected by mass incarceration. And so what I'm working on now, it's still pretty preliminary, but what I'm finding is I think that a lot of the jobs that women are, and this is relevant to the talk, but I think that a lot of the jobs that formerly incarcerated Black women find themselves being able to actually move up in are jobs that involve like organizing and community outreach. And I think that's really interesting. And I think there could be more, I think there should be more discussion about why that is and what does that mean for formerly incarcerated Black women's opportunities for work when they're coming home from prison. So that's kind of what I'm trying to answer, what I'm looking at right now.
Wonderful, wonderful. Look forward to hearing the end results of that. So Teleza, please share with us just a little bit about your work and how it's connected to what we're discussing this evening.
Hello, everyone. So this journey for me started, excuse me, when I was denied the right to work in this beautiful city and state that I was born and raised in after successfully completing intense probation, as well as becoming certified for billing and coding. In my mind, I wanted to do for my children, without any assistance. I wanted to be an asset to my community and not rely on link or, subsidies like that. But when I was denied after being hired, no one could explain to me what was going on. And I thought, who has this happened to? How do I connect the dots? I did everything I was supposed to do, and now I can't work after being hired. And so that led me to, I became a part of CRS, which led me to FORCE, which was Fighting to Overcome Records and Create Equality. But I guess the biggest piece is I learned how to not just accept no. I learned from my brother Marlon Chamberlain and some other great people that we have a voice and we should use it. And so that taught me the importance of lobbying for myself and speaking up about the discrepancies that I wasn't educated on, or I would have tried to work somewhere else. And then it also opened the door for other women who had work jobs, but then they were fired for similar reasons. And so that brought me into my community a little bit deeper, where I began working with the younger population. And I found out that there's really nothing connecting women to where we come from. We have to hustle and bustle and overdo a lot of things just to be, for lack of better words right now, considered normal or considered an asset, right? And so me, I'm a single mom of 4 boys, and I'm on the west side of Chicago. So my weight naturally was totally different because, you know, the city is, to me, no different than what it was. It's just the age as far as the violence and the mass incarceration. But it's all tied to trauma. It's all tied to pain. So after several conversations, it brought about where I had been and where I needed to go. And so with that, that led me to, again, working with victims and perpetrators in my community, getting to know what's available. But then it was still specifically for men. So I'm like, okay, what is this and what's going on? And so I am still learning some things, and continuing my education is still something that I'm seeking, but it's just a lot of discrepancies in this lane.
You're so right. And I think that that's one of the things that we notice quite a bit, you know, as we all kind of discussed and we've seen either through the work that we're doing or lived experience. And so we're going to start with our first official question. As we are discussing these barriers to employment for directly impacted women, and you've all clearly touched on that, can you speak to the intersectionality and how things such as race, age, gender, educational levels of people affect the outcomes of these women as they seek quality jobs and livable wages? And I think Teleza kind of spoke to that with her own experience, but we can just kind of build on that, your thoughts. And we can start with Deborah.
Okay. As we know, most of us women of color probably have already, you look at race and age, gender, all those different things, right? Incarceration to me is an add-on along with mental illness. These are things that affect all of us at some point. Now, I've been fortunate because I'm actually a retired government worker, and I experienced everything that's on this list at some point in my life. I can only imagine, and working with the women that I do in the nonprofit world, it is very, very difficult for them to try to move beyond being that victim and seeing themselves as having all of these things to, as I consider them, barriers. How do they get through this? How do they get over this? How do we not come in to this as a victim? And how do we find quality jobs? I'm going to be honest with you. Most of the women that I'm working with have had to take the job, a job. And I know we don't want to hear that. And I know we hate saying that. But I have to tell you, they're going to have to take a job and they're going to face these things, but they don't have to stay there. And that's my mantra for it is that, because why? Why do I say that? Because as I told you, I've spent many, many years already working, and now this is kind of my second thing. This is more of a calling than it's a job to me. And so having had more men in my family be incarcerated than women, I'm dealing only with the women that are coming through that door with me. And so what we do is look for employers that will hire them. And unfortunately, it's not going to be in the area they once were. I've had people who came in that were once, you know, they were degreed, they still are degreed, I should say, but they can't go back to that work. You know what I'm saying? They couldn't go back to the bank. They couldn't go back here. When one lady in particular was able to go to a union hall and get a job. She, you know, now she wasn't a person of color, so I don't know if she had those same barriers that, say, if we flip that and put a woman in color in there and had sent her to the union hall, would she been able to get that white collar job? But what I want to just say is that it's real. I'm not making less of it. What is a livable wage? Most of the warehouses jobs are going to give you more than minimum wage. They're going to start you in our area, 14, 15, 17. But they're going to give you the worst shifts, the hardest shifts. It's tough. But while you're there, you're dealing with your age, you're dealing with your gender, you're dealing with, I expect you to work as hard as any man. I expect this and that. You may have 2 or 3 degrees, but this job you're doing doesn't even require a degree, right? So you're feeling some kind of way. I'm not saying take it, but I'm saying think about where you're at, what you're dealing with. This is the real deal. And then until we can get some of these changes that we'll talk about later implemented, I find that I would tell one person, he was a male though, and I just have to throw this out because he came in, I used to make $20 an hour. I said, so I'm gonna need you to go get 2 $10 an hour jobs. Now, I didn't like that, and you may be offended. It's not my intent to offend anybody, but I'm telling you, you're looking at a woman who started at the bottom with no education, but thought I deserve as many rights as anybody else. Until I worked my way through, I thought my experience could handle it. Then I had to get my education. I had 5 children. I worked through everything. So I don't stop and say, oh, focus on just incarceration. Focus just on my mental illness. Focus just on my age or my gender. Right before I retired, I was dealing with ageism. I'd already gone through sexism. I'd already gone through being a Christian, being Black, all of those things that would destroy you. But I learned one thing through all of that, perseverance. So I encourage you to persevere. That's a difficult thing, easier said than done. I've never been incarcerated, but I have to throw this out and I'm done. I have 3 sons, they all have felony records. But this started with my brother. It almost ended with my father. And then I have 9 nephews that are incarcerated. So do I know about this? You better believe I do. Do I know how difficult it is? Male or female, you better know that I do. So I'm not trying to sound as though I'm not an advocate for the things that we're discussing. I'm simply saying persevere, continue, and look at each and every one of these barriers and do not become victimized by it, but find a way to be victorious. I'm sorry if I went too far, because it just was just intense there.
Okay, it's okay. Erica, your thoughts around the intersectionality of the things that we mentioned?
Sure. First, I guess I would just, I'll mention a little bit about what I've read, and then I can share what I've actually heard from women that I've interviewed. So the little bit that the bit that I've read, because there's not a lot of extensive research on women returning home from prison and employment, opportunities. But one thing that some research has found is that single women, Black women, and women with more extensive criminal records they face more barriers in the job market. Like there's some research that suggests that. And then also Black women, there was a study that I remember reading by Marcy Seville, and essentially what she found was that when they were putting out applications, Black women had the lowest rates of callbacks, like Black women and these were all women with incarceration histories. So just from the little bit of research that I have come across, race definitely compounds having a criminal record on top of being a woman with a criminal record, and gender also, there seems to be a compounding effect with gender, being a woman and also having a criminal record. And I think part of what part of what that comes from is what I've heard from women that I've talked to is that they talk about, well, a lot of the jobs that are available are geared towards men. They're not really geared towards women. And then a lot of the jobs don't take into consideration women with children and how their schedules are different from, single men or just men working. So that's one thing. And then also I've talked to women, Black women have talked to me and they've said, sometimes I've gone in and I've applied for jobs and I don't know if I was denied because of my race or because I have a criminal record or both. And so there's definitely these compounding stigmas that women have to face when they're coming home from prison that I think that may be more amplified because they are women, because I think that there's definitely a gender effect. It's just that I don't think we know as much as we should know about how that looks for women versus men. But definitely, if you are a person with a criminal record, if you are a person who's also a woman with a criminal record, if you're a person who's a woman with a criminal record, and you're also a Black woman with a criminal record, all these things just make the looking for employment makes that whole process much more difficult.
Thank you. Teleza, I know you kind of spoke a little bit about this in your introduction. Would you like to expand a little bit more on this particular issue?
Well, everything that was said thus far is true, especially our first panelist, what she said as far as education. I have learned the hard way that is our gateway, and that is our kind of help navigate those missing pieces, because we are overlooked, we are underpaid based on our experience now. It really doesn't matter like it did maybe 10 years ago. So I am well aware that education is one of the biggest keys to keep us out of that status quo and to help us continue to thrive coming from where we come from.
Absolutely. And, you know, I'll just share when so I am formerly incarcerated, and I can remember before I went in, my pretrial officer encouraged me to like get as many certificates and training as possible, because she was just like, when you come home, you're going to need it. And so my coaching training, all of that was done during pretrial. I defended my dissertation during pretrial. Like everything was done in preparation for my reentry, which is, you know, which a lot of people don't always think about, you know, when you know that you're about to be sentenced to prison. And so I appreciate you all lifting that up, and I think that is something really important. And so I just want to kind of follow up on, as we're discussing this, and Deborah mentioned mental health, but I also want to kind of bring in, when you think about issues of around substance use and the various types of convictions, right? You hear these conversations about violent versus non-violent. And then it was also mentioned around like motherhood status and the effects as far as access to resources and jobs upon reentry. Like if there's anybody that's interested in maybe speaking to that particular issue when we look at mental health, substance use, various types of convictions. And this is open to any of the panelists.
I would just add that the challenge is real for all of these areas, and you're going to be judged, and you're going to have some jobs that you will not even be able to qualify for. Let's take something simple as the post office. It's a government job, and it'll have a background check, and it will ask those questions, and it will make you feel as though just because it'll say something like, oh, this may not be held against you. Don't believe that, because it's going to be held against you. So what do? Do you lie about it? No, we don't want you to do that, because if you found out, then you too might, you will automatically lose the job, right? So these barriers, you have to keep looking for some job within that same, say, postal service that doesn't require some type of, what I want to say, security clearance. Like before I left, I had a top secret. And I remember thinking that I wasn't going to get it because of my family background, that they were going to investigate into that and I would be disqualified for a top secret. But I got through. And I just feel by the grace of God, and because the guy got off track and just started asking questions, and I must have impressed him, and he just, there I was in. So when you look at things like motherhood, when you look at things like mental health, when you look at the violent, nonviolent, one of my sons is a violent offender. And I know that this is not everybody's story, but we started saving from him. I said, listen, I can't just keep putting money on your books. You're coming home one day, so we don't need to get you together. So he started talking about being self-employed. I said, you may have to do that. And that's the thing that I know, that there are organizations out there that we've got to start looking for that kind of money, or we can help them get around these things, because some of these things, it's policy change. It's going to take a while to get some of these changes so that we can get them to where they need to be. So motherhood is an issue without even incarceration. There are many jobs that still have an issue. Now, the one lady that I had, she had a substance abuse problem. She's still with me. She fell totally off the wagon. Guess what? They had FMLA. She'd been on the job over a year, so she had medical insurance. Guess what? She's going back to work next week. That wouldn't have happened had she not had, she's still been working temp agency. She'd not been picked up permanently. She'd not had that. She would not have had a job. She was able to go to them, get them to pay while she was in treatment and get back on the wagon. So I'm just trying to throw those things out there that says, yes, these are barriers. These are issues. Yes, they're real. But you have to keep looking for those things that get you, let's knock them over, knock them down, go around them. And sometimes we're facing them head on. And we feel like, well, maybe I didn't get through. But guess what? Don't stop, because somebody behind you will get through. That's my thought on that.
Any other thoughts from other panelists?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. So with the substance abuse, that is a common issue that I've found in my own work, that a lot of formerly incarcerated women struggle with. And one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of the times when women are coming home and they have a history of substance abuse or they struggle with trying to get treatment for substance abuse at the same time, but also trying to find employment. And it's a lot for women to balance. And then also on top of that, dealing with the stigma of being someone who has a substance abuse issue. Women talk extensively about feeling stigmatized by family and friends of, being a quote unquote dope fiend, things like that. And I think that that's also something that can hinder the job process, looking for the employment process, is that women have to deal with this, the stigma of not only being incarcerated and then on top of that with gender and race, but also like having a substance abuse issue. And another thing that I haven't seen too much in my work, but I think is worth talking about more and also researching more is the effects of women with more violent offenses and who have more extensive records, because I do think that that could be an additional barrier to employment just because of the stigma that carries with it. So yeah, I definitely think that those are things that can be barriers to jobs and also resources. And especially going back to the substance abuse, I think that's particularly true for women coming home, just because there are higher rates of women struggling with substance abuse who have a history of incarceration. So yeah.
Okay, so we're going kind of to the next question, and I'll just kind of start this because I think this is something to really consider. And I've been having some conversations recently with people who've been home for a while, but they share that they have struggled in that transition home because, you immediately get home, you want to secure a job, especially if you have conditions, right, to like probation or parole. So it's like you're in this hurry to kind of get things going. Or if you are like a single parent like I was, I'm like, I'm trying to get my daughter back. I want to make sure I'm good and stable. And so what do you all think are some of the pressures and unfair expectations that directly impacted people face when they're re-entering the workforce? And just thinking about, things like having to start as soon as they get home, not really having an opportunity to adjust, feeling like they have to be perfect on a job or they're going to potentially lose their job. Like, what are your thoughts about that? And I'll start with Teleza.
Just from my experience with men and women coming home, first of all, substance abuse is the least that is even talked about or dealt with when they're incarcerated. There's no rehabilitation for them. So often when they come home, they come back to basically what they left. They come back to communities that are still drug, impacted. They come back to family members that likely haven't made changes. And so that's a kind of a trigger for them. And they're forced a lot to get a job just for the sake of eating a decent meal, having a roof over your head, depending on the community, because often the family is already at wit's end with, you know, just living within these specific areas. I'll just use North Lawndale. Some people look at this as the worst place. It's, you know, highlighted as one of the worst places in the city. And I was just amazed that I found comfort here, right? But it's a familiar place for me. And so because I've been heavily impacted by trauma, and I'm just gonna keep it real, I've been more uncomfortable in places that probably, I'm sure someone who hasn't been involved in trauma like me, like my mom is mentally ill. I am a overcomer of domestic violence. That is not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. I take ownership for my part. But it's around me, right? So sometimes I'm not even thinking about it, can see it before it happens, but somewhere in my makeup, I normalized it. And I know that I'm not the only one that has felt or feels this way, but that's an issue, right? Because even when my own child was incarcerated, because of my background, I was denied the right to see him. That's an issue. So that built up anger within me against what? The warden and whomever, you know, denied me the access. And I'm not the only one that's felt that. So it left me unprepared to receive him because of whatever he was dealing with in there. I couldn't really feel him without that contact. It's only so much you're gonna write. But those issues are real and they're so unaddressed. And then you talking about women, I'm not a man, right? But even inside, just to be real again, some of those guards are horrible to females. And I get that that's supposed to keep you out of there, but I'm not a dog, you know, and I'm as real as I can be. When it was that time, that guard treated me like I was inhumane and I was willing to like hurt her, you know, because that was a new space for me. So it's really nothing to bridge the gap except the people that's been there, done that, to uplift the people that's going through it, coming from it, because it's no relation. It's no relation. I mean, that's just what I've seen. That's what I know. Even for me, continuing my education was a fear, right? It was a fear because I knew what I hadn't really dealt with. And so it was that baggage. It was all this stuff that because of, you know, where I come from, I had to unpack to really focus. You know, you taking away focus when you tampering with livelihoods. You lock somebody up, then you bring them back and they don't have nothing. What do you really expect them to do? Let's just be honest. What are they gonna do? How quick you think a homeless person gonna go enroll in school when after school is over with everybody going home and he or she is going wherever? Wherever don't work for everybody. You know what I'm saying? So it's so many things that's just not addressed that these conversations are really, really impactful because it's, you know, it's out there and we know and we see, but we can do something about it. But when you don't know what to do, you do what you knew to do so easily, so easily when you feel like you don't fit in.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do any of our other panelists want to speak to this? Some of the pressures and unfair expectations?
Just quickly adding to Teleza, we recently have a licensed counselor contracted to do trauma and grief because we saw so much trauma, heard so much trauma, and understand that it's real. And it's even more now with the pandemic because many have lost jobs that had whatever type of job because of what's going on. So go back to the initial part of the question, we were like, okay, can we afford to house someone for 30 to 60 days, even if they don't have a sponsor? Because we were like, they gotta have time to at least come home and figure out where anything is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So pray for us on that, because we really stepping out with or without a sponsor and saying, I'm gonna give you 30 days. I don't know how we're gonna pay the rent, but we're gonna do this because we see the need and we're going to give you a professional licensed person to talk with in doing so. You know what I'm saying? Not just me, but someone who's been schooled and can deal with the trauma and talk to you about your grief and however long it takes, but give you some time. They're feeling pressure from parole, from family, from everybody to get off the couch, to contribute. And how do they do that? The one guy I've got right now, I know he's a guy, but I was in a same situation with two of the females that were out of jail. No identities, no nothing to go even get a job. So the pressure was ridiculous, or the fees that come with being on parole and things like that. It's just like, unless organizations such as ours or others that are much, much, much larger and more capable can really look at what you all are telling us, which is what makes this so great, is the need before you put in. We can't stop parole from saying you have to, especially if you're federal, because there are different rules for federal and state parolees. But if we can work hand in hand as a team with them, that's something that I'd like to mention as well, to help to relieve some of this pressure. That would be a good going forward, something to consider.
Thank you. Thank you. And, you know, as you're talking about that, I was just thinking about, you know, just with my own experience. I was at a halfway house when I initially came home. And, you know, there's all this pressure of, you know, well, if you get a job, you can leave, you can get movement. So they want you to, you know, like that's your way out. And so a lot of times people pick up jobs, like you said, they're not really mentally prepared, or in some instances, they're people who've never worked a job before. And there's this expectation of people just going out and be gainfully employed right after they've been incarcerated. And so I think that there has to be some education with the people who are providing the service, right, as well as employers, because they have to understand that although this person may have done a certain thing, maybe in the prison, they may have, I mean, you don't really have an option. You know, when you're in prison, you don't have an option. This is what you have to do. But it's a difference when you are actually being asked to go work a 9 to 5 or whatever type of schedule. If you, in some places, it may be 12 or 10-hour days, and what that looks like for someone that's just returning home. And so just as a follow-up to that, how would you all educate employers or other stakeholders on just adjusting maybe those expectations of directly impacted women and really being understanding of what those barriers are that exist? Because I think a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm a second chance employer. Oh, we'll hire people with criminal records, but they don't necessarily know what that means. And they oftentimes do it because they get, incentives for that type of thing. And so they're not necessarily prepared to receive people. And so what types of things would you say would be beneficial for those particular employers or entities?
I'm sorry, it was on the tip of my tongue when you said what would put us at the table, period. We need to be in those conversations. We don't need to read about it. We don't need to do a questionnaire or a survey. We need to be at the table stating what people like you and I need when we come home, when we have relatives that are showing us what they need, but we have to be at the table. It's no different than being on the PTA. You got to be at the table to really know what's going on so that you can voice where you're coming from. And where you're coming from, there's a lot more like you. We're not in the conversation. That's the problem. They're not listening to us. They hear about us, right? And then when we do something else, it's, oh, well, we're not at the table. People like us need to be at the table. We need to be in Springfield when they pass these laws, when they're not walking through our communities. I have a problem with my alderman right here. When he sees something going on in this neighborhood and he drives past it, I feel some type of way. I don't know how I can support you when there is some good in North Lawndale and you find it necessary to not even speak, not even engage with the people, not even, show your face in these hardcore blocks, and you just drive past. But yet we have to come to you for something. How about you come out here and do what we need to be done? How about you do that sometime? Put us at the table. That's it. That's all.
I would also echo what Teleza said. Like, she's absolutely right. Like, I think that formerly incarcerated women and people in general need to be at the forefront of these conversations. And another thing that I personally would say to employers is that they need to be flexible and very understanding of what formerly incarcerated, I'll speak to women because I work with women, but that what women go through, because a lot of women, as I mentioned earlier, are juggling going to substance abuse treatment, they're juggling childcare, they're juggling, like if they're a part of, you know, a halfway home or something like that, they're juggling things that they have to complete to successfully complete those programs. And also just being aware of some of the challenges that women face. So for example, one thing that I noticed when I was doing my interviews that I've done when I've done interviews in the past is there was one woman who worked at a restaurant, and she would take, I think she was in Chicago, and she would take like 2 trains and a bus to get to work. And it's just like, that was a known chain restaurant. And I'm thinking, why didn't they place her somewhere closer to where she lives so she can get to work, so she doesn't have to go through all that trouble just to get to work? And she was getting up like super early in the morning just to go to work, and then her commute home was like, you know, 2 hours. But I think employers just need to be aware that a lot of women coming home don't have adequate transportation. They don't have they need to have flexibility in what types of schedules they're being given to work. They need flexibility, and also understanding that, you know, a lot of women who are coming home are on parole and they can't just leave whenever they want to leave. They have an ankle monitor. But just like being flexible and understanding and working with people's individual schedules, I think would alleviate a lot of the burden that women have to carry when they're trying to start work and maintain employment. So that's just like based off of what I've heard and what I've listened to women tell me. So yeah.
I just want to quickly add to that. How do we get the employer to understand that this thing will affect the community and generations to come? If we can, because we've got to be able to sit down with HR and all these different companies, whether it's the restaurant industry. I called a company the other day to speak to HR. So, well, let me put you on hold. Let me ask my boss, because I asked this question. You're having a job fair on the 1st. Can I send the people that I work with that have felonies, so just point one in, to your job fair? They were going to be pickers. She said, well, we have a private company doing the background checks. Now, right there tells me we're in trouble, right? Because the private company is going to be looking for what? Why else would they, you know? So I was talking to another friend who's been in prison ministry for many, many years. She said, Deb, people have to understand. You got to get to their hearts, because this is an inside-out job. I'm going to be a preacher just a minute, I promise. We've got to find ways to get people to see why what they do will benefit them more than just bond money, but long-term, right? We can get you to care enough, because they got to care, because they're not caring right now. They just want you to come to work. I'm paying you, you getting a check, I get a worker. But we got to go deeper, right? They need to care that lives are being changed, that communities are being affected, and that my son and daughter won't have to follow my footsteps. Now that may be lobbying, and that may be my next move. I don't know, but I'm telling you, that's where we're at. We cannot expect just a company to care, because they're seeing the bottom line, and they're not seeing people as we want them to see, because you are. We call you returning citizens. I don't use ex-offender too much anymore, because you have the right to return to a community and be a full-fledged citizen.
Absolutely. And that is what we are continuing to advocate and fight for in this journey here. So with everything that we've kind of discussed, what would you all say are some strategies for the women that you all are discussing, those people who are formerly incarcerated, directly impacted, just different strategies that they can use to overcome some of these barriers to their employment search? And some of the examples might be some different networking techniques or volunteering, or even how to discuss their background, right? Like, how do you share with someone that you have a background? What are some strategies that you all think about?
Well, what I learned is what opened me up is someone that had I guess, a similar testimony, a shared value of mine, like, because often I think for many of us women, we do wear several hats, and you know, maybe you have or haven't been directly impacted by incarceration or trauma. To some extent, you know about it. But I know for me personally, it took me years to be real with myself because, again, my environment was what I had endured. So it silenced me for a long time, you know, because it was just everyday life. It for whatever reason, I didn't know the effects that it had on me because I had blocked it, right? Because nobody talked about mental illness years ago. So I can really boldly speak to this. The movie Soul Food, what they did to Uncle Pete, you know, he just got his food. They really didn't engage with him. Some of us think that's normal, right? Me personally, having a mother that's mentally ill and people thought she was normal, so did I, right? Until I started seeing some things, but nobody else knew about it. So I wasn't just gonna go throw my mother under the bus or just say, hey, this is happening to me. So you have to have one-on-ones. We have to get back to knowing our neighbors and knowing who we working with, you know, like church, right? Know those that labor among you. Know your community. Know who lives next door to you. Now, times have changed, of course. I know for me personally, it's kind of sketchy, I'm gonna be honest, because of where I live at. And there's always traffic. Somebody new moves in at wee hours of the morning. I come outside, there's a new face. I'm a little different because I have a little boy, so I tend to speak to everybody just to get an idea. But when I grew up, this city wasn't like that. So we lost that. And so we have to bring it back. You know, somebody just has to be that beacon of light, no matter how dark it is. That's that transparency, that's that resilience. And somebody has to use their voice. So once I started talking, it's hard for me to stop. Can't you tell? I have something to say to this, you know, and maybe, you know, hopefully, prayerfully, it'll open up some doors where some more people like me got something to say. This is wrong. This hurt. I sat on this because I didn't think anyone cared, right? And so we just have to talk to one another. I mean, we have to really care about one another. It does me no good to sit here and feel like I need to leave my community. I'm in North Lawndale, and then I move in Austin, and it's the same thing, you know. So we just have to bridge these gaps. I mean, we have to do it. I don't know any other way to say it other than getting to know people. That's the only way you're going to get those conversations started. Don't assume you know. Ask those questions sometimes. Sometimes people want you to ask them, did this bother you? But of course, you have to discern that and, you know, work your way to that. But we have to talk to people.
Any other thoughts about strategies?
One of the strategies that I have pushed from day one was volunteerism, and not just so I can have a warm body. Anyone that knows me will know that I would tell them right up front, we're going to put this on your resume. We're going to give you a true job description, and we're going to give you a dollar value. Because volunteerism does have a dollar value. In Illinois, it's probably a 4-year-old document. Some work was valued starting in at $27 an hour. What does that do for you? You may not have received that, right? But if you volunteered for about a year or so, all of a sudden we got a change in your resume. It's a small thing, but it's a powerful thing. And I've actually seen someone get work behind using our organization as someone they volunteered for, showing the work that they did, and then getting a reference from me and got hired. So that's one strategy. And then I think if you take that along with finding out what other organizations out here, those that we've got a few organizations like Employment Connection, the Urban League, that they have a larger focus on employment. Not only just, getting you ready for the basics like resume writing and all of that, but they actually have some connections with some of the employees that are friendlier to the returning citizen and offer some work. So I think that if we can, enlarge that group and get more of a dedicated committee like this to do that type of work, because really what I find, it takes a lot of time and effort and some committed people.
Okay, thank you so much for lifting that up. Erica, did you want to chime in as well?
Yeah. One thing I would say is that networking is, I think, crucial for women coming back from back home from prison. And one thing that I've heard from multiple women is that they talk about, when I ask them, okay, so how did you get this job? They'll say, oh, well, so-and-so gave my name to so-and-so, and then they gave my name to this other person. And they actually told me, I had one woman who went, after she came home from prison, she went back to school, and she's currently like in graduate school. And she was saying, like, I don't think it was necessarily my education that got me this job. I think it was the networks that I was a part of that basically got me this job, because somebody dropped my name and they passed my name on to someone else who was a part of this organization, and they wanted me to work for this organization. And so I think that, like, unfortunately, because of the stigma of having a criminal record, I think that networking is honestly it's probably a lot of women's best bet in getting gainful employment, just because of the stigma. The stigma of having a criminal record is so strong. But I think, yeah, definitely helping women learn how to network, and, making sure that they're going to events where they can talk to people who are very well connected. I think that would be that's a great way to make sure that women who are coming home from prison are able to, like, secure employment, and probably secure it much quicker than they would if they just kind of, went out and applied for a job just on the spot.
Absolutely. And I'll just add, like, this group right here, right? The participants, the panelists, this is a network. This is an opportunity for people to really be able to come together and build and provide that layer of support that the women that we're talking about can use and benefit from. So I think it really starts here with all the people that are speaking, the people who are in the chat box, the people who are asking Teleza if she's eligible to run for positions. It's all of us coming together and really building a base, because that's where the power is going to lie. And so I'm going to direct this next question to Teleza as it relates to policy. So what policies do you believe should be supported to minimize barriers for directly impacted people as it relates to their employment searches? And then, are there any organizations that you know of right now that are promoting policies that, as a whole, all of us, all 48 participants and panelists can support at this point to make some things move here in our area?
Well, off the top of my head, what comes to mind would be, I'm thinking West Side Health Authority. They do some kind of work with that. It's just a couple, but I'm sorry. Not off the top of my head. I don't have the exact answer to a specific organization. But I do think that as far as women, there needs to be a policy that once you've done your time, once you've done the crime and done the time, it's over with. Don't look at it anymore. Let them go on with their lives. Stop stereotyping, based on what was done, and look at the qualifications, look at how this woman has overcome what she's endured. So I'm not putting it in policy words, so to speak, right now, but it has to be something in writing that says she can now go forward. She is not, her past is her past, it's done, it's done. She is now able to go forth based on how she's moved from her past, instead of, again, just take a job. I understand that I am slightly different. That's just based on having the mother that I had. I had a son who was diagnosed with bipolar schizophrenic at an early age, right? Again, I knew nothing about mental illness. I am aware because he went to Montefiore at an early age. There are countless mothers in this city with my same type of endurance, but they don't know what to do about it. Because even in my case, I was still looking for a job, right? So just imagine that I had done everything that I was supposed to do, keeping my child. That's also, I'm learning because I don't even know about mental illness. Because, you know, back in the day, we didn't talk about mental illness. Most of us come from that, what happens in this house stays in this house. So I didn't know what to do. And I found out again that there are a lot of women that just don't know what to do. And again, we just have to be at the table when these policies are being made, when things are being written down about me. You need to talk to me. You know what I'm saying? You need to see where I am. Don't assume. You need to find out what is going on. How can you even write something about something that you know nothing about? And those are the type of barriers that I ran into. You know, I'm just gonna toot my own horn. No, I don't have a degree, but I promise you, if you show me your job, I can do it. And that in itself is a fear for women outside of where I come from. Because most of us on this side, we go-getters, we hustlers, we do what we have to do to survive. Some women didn't have it like that. Some things were given to them, you know, the way it was given to them. I'm not trying to say one is better than the other, but what I am saying is when you gonna write a policy about a woman that's being incarcerated or coming from incarceration, a woman that's been there, done that should be at the table, rightfully so, with comeness about it, you know, because some of us women go through life and we're still angry about some things we may have endured to get where we are. So we don't want that. I'm speaking from my heart right now. We don't want that type at the table, but you have to include us. There's no other way. You have to include us in us. We can't be left out and then invited in and then we find out this don't work for us.
Absolutely. You're so right. And I just want to, as we are kind of coming to a close of our questions for our panelists, I want to put it out there to the audience that if you do have questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A section or in the chat. If there are specific things. I know that there were some questions as it relates to what we were just talking about with policy, and there was information dropped in the chat of some of the organizations that are doing some of the work around barriers for reentry. So please take a moment to look in the chat for those resources and be able to, you know, just jot those down so you can go back and reference them. Are there any other questions? I'm trying to see here real quick in our chat. Most of them, it looks like, were more comments. So I'm gonna ask this last question as we kind of come to a close. And this is more around, and we've talked a little bit, but not specific to like programming. So in your thoughts and opinions, what are some of the gaps as it relates to actual job readiness programs for women? And then how does that then relate to job opportunities? So this is more specific to programming that exists in the community to address job readiness for women. Did you want to start, Teleza? I see you're unmuted there.
I apologize. No, can someone go? I apologize.
Okay, no, you're fine. So are there job readiness programs that you all are aware of, or what are your thoughts about job readiness?
There are, like the information that's being dropped in the chat, one of the challenges that we have as organizations is almost like being an island, which is why I love this alliance that's coming about, because we've learned so many more organizations. So what you find is you don't know what you don't know is out there. For instance, most people would not believe that I attended a reentry summit when we could go inside. And the lady sitting next to me was from the unemployment office, begging for me to send, yes, not for unemployment as we know it, right? were for incarceration. She was there at the summit to get individuals to come sign up so she could help them with the resume and offer them position. But she couldn't give them the position, right? But she had this whole database. People don't know, so they don't go. So how do we get that information out? How do we connect the dots, which is something that I have in the back burner, and is how do we connect those dots? How do we tell those coming home where these places are? How do they get ready? The gaps are knowing where you are, or knowing where to go, how long it's going to take. Do I have the time to get there? Are the hours available to me? It's so many different little things like that that cause job readiness. We're good at getting the resumes, right? We're good at telling them, okay, these people are friendly. They will hire you. But we are not so well at being able to prepare them and giving them enough time to get all of those things together to get to where they need to be. So there seems to me, even I was challenged. When I started this organization, I immediately knew there were three things I wanted to focus on: jobs, housing, and relationships. And I thought it was going to be just that simple, write it down on a piece of paper and make it happen. And boy, was I so ever wrong. Haven't given up, but it's a challenge like none other. So what did I have to do with housing? Do you know that your coming home from prison does not make you necessarily homeless? So I cannot get HUD funding yet until I can figure out a way to be considered. At one point you were, but now you're not. Now it's whatever last address you have that makes you, and you 9 times out of 10 can't even go back. So what do you think about job readiness? It's going to be the same kind of challenges. If we can't get the information like this out to the people, into the reentry summits, into the places where they are before you come home, not depending, because all the jails, if you look at all the prisons and stuff, I've been out on different websites, right? I'm impressed with what they offer you all. But I've heard each of you tell me what they didn't offer you. But they got it listed and they're getting the funding. So we that are able to connect, we've got to just to be a lot more proactive. So to me, the resources, the knowledge, the whereabouts, how we put it together, I think it's really important that we continue to have these discussions so that we can figure out what we're going to do. And this one final thing, this article that I have here, that is Jobs for Felons, Finding a Job Even Tougher for Former Inmates During the Pandemic. This is August 18th, 2020. So this is pretty good data. And it's basically stating, I'm sorry, because now you've got to compete with everybody else that's out here unemployed that does not have a record. As if you didn't already have to do that. But because of a result of the pandemic, you're even more likely to be challenged on finding good work.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to speak to this particular topic? Okay. So I just want to kind of, as I look to the chat to see, I'm just going to kind of do just a little wrap up. So in the conversation today, I really heard three kind of key areas that were discussed. And I feel like Teleza really elevated this conversation around having the voices of directly impacted people just center, in this work, right? But also you all, as the 47 people that are currently on here, being able to come together as a collective to create this change. So having those directly impacted people leading the way, but also tapping into all these different resources and services. I see the chat box, people are just dropping information in. So how do we come together to really discuss these barriers and develop a plan? And then the other thing that I really heard lifted up was change, policy change, legislative change. And so again, that comes with having a collective group of people who have common interests in common goals of creating change and to eliminate these barriers. And so I know that there are organizations that are kind of working on this and different names are dropped in, but just want to really challenge everybody to think about, as a collective, how can everyone come together as a united front to be able to create some of these policy changes that we want to see happen, and even some of the developments for potential programming that may help additional supports and resources for the women that we're talking about. So I just want to kind of put out to our panelists, as we start to come to a close, what are some action steps that our audience here can potentially just take with them? So once they leave you all this evening, what are some different things that they can do? And then I'll also jump in and share some things as well.
I would say one thing that's, I think, would be relatively easy to do is just to get involved, even if it's just volunteering with women, with organizations that specifically work with women who've been incarcerated. I know that was one of the things I tried to do when I was as I've been a grad student at Northwestern, but it's kind of hard with my schedule. But just being able to go to like halfway homes or treatment centers, places that directly like work with women, being able to give your time, and if you can't give your time, maybe donating to some of these places. I think that would be a good way to kind of like easily get started and to make a direct impact.
I definitely agree with that, especially the volunteer piece. And again, for me, it's just using my voice because we normalize so much in North Lawndale, for example, and there's so much wrong, you know. So it's just talking about what needs to be talked about and leaving alone what needs to be left alone. And, you know, women are crucial. We are everything. And we have to, it's okay to own that. And it's okay to support that, you know, with someone else. But we have to educate one another on things that we don't know. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm the only one in the room with a mentally ill mother, right? In my past, but not that I'm judging. Once I start talking, then someone else relates to maybe an auntie, and then this is what happened to my cousins. And so we just have to be open to those places where women are at that are vulnerable and that want to have the information, but it's not quote unquote in black and white. It's within us more so than on paper right now.
And I just want to encourage us to continue the discussions, not to just, you know, for a panel moment and an event, but continue, just like all the other fights that we've got going right now in our society. We've been called to this mission, and I admit it is some difficult days where I think Lord, can you have given me the children? Can you have given me something, you know, just a little less difficult? But I must tell you, there's no greater joy when you know your purpose and you walk in your purpose. So I encourage you to look at what God is speaking to your heart about and where you are, and show up and be actively engaged. And let's be able to, as women, to put down all the differences and competitiveness that so often occurs, and really, really kind of, you know, be uniform in our efforts to see change. I admit, I have no idea where I'm gonna find some more free hours. But I'm here to say, I'm willing. I'm willing, because there's probably something that I'm saying yes to that I need to say no to, so that I can say yes to something more like this that's going to move us forward. This has convinced me personally that it's just not enough to want to do good, but you've got to understand that the choices and changes that we are trying to make is for generations to come.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Thank you all. And I just want to lift up that, and it's kind of what you all already stated, that it's so important for people to really be able to show up in different spaces and support the work that's currently being done. Obviously, a way for you all to get involved could be joining the alliance that is hosting this event. And just keeping in mind that, you know, I always tell people we all have different things that we're passionate about, that we're interested in. And so really, taking some time to research, right? And find out like what organizations or groups are out there that you may want to align yourself with and get involved with. Another important issue is voting, right? This is an election year. And so it's really important to not only vote, but also be an informed voter. So taking the time to educate yourself on the various candidates, you know, what are their thoughts around criminal justice work and, you know, working with returning citizens, all these types of things, right? Like what are you what are you representing when you go to the poll and vote? Like, what stands out for you? And so that is going to be a critical thing as well. And so seeking out opportunities to attend educational events around that as well. And then I think it was already mentioned, Erica mentioned donations and things like that. So there are a lot of organizations, especially with COVID right now, that have lost a lot of money that would have been coming in through grant opportunities and just different things like that. And so donating and supporting organizations as on a funding level is also really important. So if you have those resources, or you have access to different grant opportunities, right? Sometimes we see grants and we're like, oh, this may benefit this organization or this group. Being able to share those resources and that information is going to be critical as we move forward and we continue to do this work. And so I want to just thank our panelists and just lift each of them up, because they have really brought some different perspectives to this conversation. And I'm hoping that the audience, although there weren't a lot of questions, I'm hoping that that just means that we just really knocked it out the park and we just covered everything that you all wanted to discuss tonight. But I just want to thank you all, because I think that this conversation is so important. And I think that we do have to really decide, how do we want to move forward as we're supporting women that are coming home? And also, how are we ensuring that, you know, they're going into these employment settings and they're being successful, right? We don't want them to constantly get a job, lose a job, get a job, lose a job. We want them to have some stability, not only for themselves, but as mentioned before, their families, their communities, because it is a ripple effect, right? It's not just about them. It's about all of us. So if it happens to one, it really happens to all. And so just kind of keeping that in mind. So as we kind of come to an end, just want to remind everybody that there is going to be a survey for you all to complete. And so that will be sent out in the chat. And there will also be a follow-up email. If you want to learn more about getting involved with the Alliance, please reach out to Marlon Chamberlain, and I'm going to see if his information is being dropped in the chat, but it should be. And there's also the survey that has been dropped in the chat, so you can actually click on that link. They're on it. Marlon's information is already in the chat as well. So, you all can reach out to him directly if this is something that you all want to get involved in. And I just want to challenge you again to take the time to network with one another, to take the time to really research the work that's being done throughout the state. We have people that are represented throughout the state, and that's a beautiful thing, because now you can kind of see what's happening in some areas versus what's happening in others, and a lot of times you can get ideas from that space. And then just as we wrap up, just keeping in mind that we will be back next week. There will be a panel that is discussing reentry and housing. And so I'll have to check into that. I will not be moderating, but I will tune in, because I tell you, as somebody who, like I said, had to transition out of a halfway house, housing was that's a whole nother, you know, barrier that people have to deal with. And as mentioned before, you know, if you don't have an ID, you don't have a residence, you don't have employment, how are you securing all these other things? So a lot of these things really truly intersect and are part of a bigger picture. And so as we are wrapping up, I don't know if any of the members of the Alliance have any additional clothing things, or I just want to make sure I covered everything. But it has been an honor to serve as your moderator this evening. I know we are probably about 5 minutes, we are ending about 5 minutes early. So I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing, but I just really appreciate the discussion. And I'm hoping that people will really act on the steps that we talked about as far as getting involved, and we'll follow up with the Alliance as it relates to their work. So we want to thank you all. And again, if there are any questions, or I did see one thing about contact information. I don't know if each of our panelists want to drop their contact information or share it with the group verbally. So it's on the recording, since those people may not see the chat. If you want to do both, that would be great, because it looks like people are interested in having that conversation as well with you all and following up.
For compassionate outreach, quick website, corcenter.org. And there's a place there where you can drop an email to me, info, and different things that you can know about it. The office number is 618-213-8402. And that's Compassionate Outreach for short. The rest is just extra.
Anyone else want to share their information?
I can. I'll actually drop my email in the chat now. But my email for people who aren't able to get it through the chat is just ericabanks2015@u.northwestern.edu. And if that's too hard to remember, because it is a long email, you can just do a quick search for my name, Erica Banks Northwestern, and I should pop up on Google. I have a page under the sociology department. So if you want to contact me, you can email me through there.
And I am Teleza Rodgers. My email is very simple, tlzrodgers@gmail.com, but I will also put it in the chat. And I just want to, again, thank you all for sharing this space with me, inviting me to this space and encouraging me. And I want to leave with this. You never, ever know what we individually are enduring. So I just believe that we must be a light for those who have yet caught on to the light.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just want to make sure for people that are dropping information in that you're sending it to the attendees as well as panelists. So just make sure if you're putting anything in the chat as far as resources or your email, that both are in there. So I just want to make sure. And I am Dr. Zaria Davis, and I will also put my information in. My email address is newdirectioncc1@gmail.com. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or thoughts. And again, we just thank you all for joining us this evening, and we appreciate the Alliance for hosting this awesome event. And we will be seeing everyone next week again. The panel will be discussing reentry and housing. So thank you all. Have a good evening.